Hey guys, tonight we're traveling to a medieval market town at dawn, where the first light reveals cobblestones lined with stalls, prices haggled over halfpennies and pence, and the promise of both coin and chaos in every corner. And if you're pumped to explore the nitty-gritty of medieval money, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You wake before sunrise, shivering in the chill that slips between cobblestones and through ragged clothes, because money in the medieval world doesn't wait for you to find your woolen cloak before it disappears. Your first thought is bread, because half a penny buys you a loaf small enough for a goblin, and rye is cheap enough that your stomach might forgive you for eating it again. But wheat, you laugh. Wheat is for nobles who don't know how it feels to scrape crumbs out of a bowl. The baker's window glows faintly as you push past the other few early risers, everyone wanting that half-penny loaf. You can smell the yeast dancing with smoke from 100 hearth fires, a warm promise that lasts until you bite into a crumb that snaps like stale twig. You clutch your copper pennies and squint at the baker's indifferent nod. He's been up since 3, kneading dough and watching prices climb with every sunrise. A halfpenny loaf this morning. Tomorrow it'll be 3 farthings more if frost ruined the harvest. Next stop, ale, because in the medieval world, water is suspect. You could die from a sip, and you'd never know until your knees buckle in the middle of the field. Small ale is your breakfast beer, a pint for a penny. If you're lucky, served lukewarm and cloudy, but at least it's guaranteed not to kill you. On your way, you pass the well where villagers queue before dawn. Rumour says the free well water is fine, but 2 weeks ago, old Gerald's neighbour died, and they said it was dysentery. But who's to say? Better the ale than risking a burial shroud before breakfast. Your fingers ache as you fish out a farthing for the candle stub you bought last night. Candle wax isn't free, and flint refills cost a halfpenny each if you find a merchant who hasn't hiked the price. Striking a flint by firelight in your little wooden hovel could cost more than your meal if you're not careful. At the bench where you sleep, you pore through what's left of your stash. 3 farthings, a battered mug, and a hope that the day's earnings will cover rent. No fairy tale here. Rent's a penny a week for a bunkhouse bench, which means sleeping shoulder to shoulder with 24 snorers and enough fleas to repopulate the king's hounds. You consider the hayloft. One of the farmhands will sublet his share during harvest rush for 2 pence a week, which buys a cot shoved between barley sacks, but at least it's dry. Temptation tugs at you, but you know the hayloft. Rats treat newcomers like rolling pin targets, and the smell of rotting straw lingers for weeks after. Then there's the roof tax. Anyone with a thatched roof pays an extra halfpenny if the chimney draws properly, because smoke that hangs close can kill neighbours' livestock. You don't have a roof, just a lean-to patched with scraps, but you pretend to know local politics when the tax collector wanders by, lest he mark you as a beggar worthy of a pittance. You trudge back to the street, the sun cresting the rooftops in an orange glow that hits the market stalls like a spotlight on a stage. Prices already jacked up from last night's frost scare. You know bundles of firewood cost you a penny today, though in summer they were half that. And now winter's rumour is in every mouth, so folks hoarded stashes, leaving you to pay a winter scarcity markup. You pause at the stall where rushlights are sold. Tallow dips might cost half a farthing each, but beeswax, strictly for the church and the aristocrats. You swallow the fetid stench of tallow because the rich folk kneel over beeswax candles, sending prayers to the heavens while you balance a flicker of fat on a stick, hoping it won't collapse into your stew. Behind you, a merchant hawks charcoal as a premium fuel. Silent, hot, and perfect for forging, but you cough at the idea because your lungs already ache from smelting hay into smoke. Charcoal's reserved for potters and armourers who can pay a premium, and you pay for it with a farthing, trading healthy lungs for fewer pence spent. Your livery is whatever someone tossed off. They sold used hose at the rag fair yesterday for 3 farthings, or you could afford something patched with wool for a penny more. You choose the rag fair because the new hose costs 4p, which would ruin your budget for the next fortnight. For shoes, you hired a travelling tailor who agreed to resole your boots with rawhide scraps for 2p if you provided the scraps. You found them scavenged from an old cow's hide, and he laughed as he slapped them on. But your heels will still leak mud come next rain, and you'll limp like a duck until the midwife patches you again. As you stroll to the gate, you're charged a gate toll, half a farthing to enter the town at dawn, plus a bridge penny if you cross the wooden span over the stream, supposedly for maintenance. Rumour is half that toll vanishes into the tax collector's purse, but you pay because avoiding it pisses off the town guard, and neither of you wants a fight before sunrise. By the vegetable stalls, a farmer asks a stall. Rent of 1p if you want to hawk your turnips by noon. You consider it because 5 of those turnips could fetch 6 farthings if you sell them near the docks. But the risk of having your cart overturned by a drunk rival looms large. You decide to wait. Tuck your turnips under your cloak and see if someone tips you a copper to cart their hay. Rumour says a pinch of pepper costs the same as a small child's toy. Dreams of exotic lands wrapped in tiny seeds. Cinnamon, strictly for the 1%, whispered like a fairy tale if you're poor. You touch one of the wooden bowls pretending to inspect, head swimming at the thought of spiced bread. But you settle for a handful of local parsley because it's free if you pick it wild. A merchant sells cane sugar by the dram, maybe a maximum of 2 drams if you can trade your last farthing for the smallest pinch. You think of how sweet it'd feel melting on your tongue, but you swallow your pride instead, because for now, sugar is a dream sold only to the wealthy. A toothache blooms, so you press a farthing into the barber surgeon's hand for a tooth-pulling surcharge. He gives you a whiff of poppy juice, an early anaesthetic that sends you to dream near death as he yanks out your rotting molar. You know you'll bleed tomorrow, but the promise of relief is worth that single coin. Midday arrives, and you're back to the tavern. The gallon jug costs 5p, but if you buy a quart mug for 1p, you sip like a miser and savour every drop. The barkeep grins at your careful approach, knowing he'll pocket more when you come back for rounds, and you buy your cheers in dribbles to stretch your coin. At the corner, farmers wager their farthing ante on town dice games. Goat-level pots if you stack the odds, and you low 5 your drinking buddy, because today you'll beat the bones and maybe get enough winnings for a better meal. You clatter the dice across the warped board, grin at your partner, and pocket 3 farthings when he sure makes up excuses about witchcraft when you roll triples. The storyteller's fee is 2p, or you can pay the bard with leftover stew. You choose stew because you've learned that silver rarely buys genuine stories. Bards love mystery meat more than coins, and tonight you'll feast on tales of dragon slaying and lost loves in exchange for a bowl of pottage. Dusk nears, and you tally your daily balance sheet in your mind. A halfpenny loaf, a pint of ale, flint refills, half a penny for candle stubs, a farthing for rushlights, 2p for rawhide soling, a farthing for gate toll, a penny for stall rent you skipped, a farthing for parsley, a farthing for poppy juice, a penny for quart of ale, and sometimes 5 farthings won at dice. Where did it go? You're broke before the moon's high. If you're a craftsman with a silver penny, your day might look different. 3 farthings buys you a bowl of modest pottage, a farthing for a shared bench, and if you can charm the barkeep, a free sample of last night's meat for inspection. But the life of a craftsman is a juggling act. Fines for late-night visits to the alehouse in guild livery, toolkit deposit you'll never see again if you lose your tools, and a buy-in fee for a 7-year shoemaker contract. Half your earnings vanish before you even slip them into your purse. If you're a servant, your halfpenny life hacks involve begging scraps, sleeping in a corner for free, and trading favours for meals. 0 savings, but at least you always have a leaning post to sleep against. You learn quickly how to fetch free meals, how to avoid the Lord's dog, and how not to offend your mistress, or you'll be tossed to the cold with nothing but a ragged tunic. If you're a pilgrim, coins are luxuries. You tuck away an indulgence fund for a mass at the cathedral, but blisters cost bread and ale in equal measure. You'll trade prayers for food, hope for coin, and sometimes barter relic donations for a night's rest. Your budget splits time between a safe bed and a blistered foot, and you pray that neither hunger nor blame finds you wandering too far outside town walls. Switchgears. If you're a serf, your labour service days are measured in bushels of grain, not coin. You might owe labour to the Lord for 5 days this month, or pay a cash rent alternative of 3 pennies. But pennies are rare, so you stick to the plough until harvest. You face coin scarcity. When harvest comes, the manor's granary larder empties your pittance into the Lord's pockets, leaving you nothing until the next planting season. Hidden in the fine print is the heriot, the death tax on your best ox. When you croak, the Lord takes the best of your animals or gear. You hide your second best cluck of chickens just so your widow might have something. Serf life is a high-stakes gamble. Survive until the end of harvest, dodge scutage if war tax arrives, and hope you don't join the cemetery choir prematurely, lest you lose the only ox that pulled your plough. If you look up to the manor lord, his ledger bulges with domain grain yield and forced mill monopoly fees. Every peasant who grinds wheat must use his mill, paying a fee in grain or coin. Potters might pay a fee to the bake oven, vintners to the wine press, and lepoilates known as banalites suck pennies out of the artisan's purse like a leech. Once a year, the steward tallies pence in, pence out, and if there's a surplus, the Lord pockets it. If there's a deficit, he blames the harvest, not himself. Guild apprentices cough up buy-in fees for a 7-year contract to become a shoemaker. The lathered cost for a toolkit deposit is like giving the guild your life savings, never to be returned. Step out after hours wearing guild livery and nursing a ale. Fine is a half-penny, but more importantly, you lose honour points and doors close when you try to find work outside guild walls. The nightly overhead is a comedy of errors. A mail hauberk for a penny today, but repairs cost 3 times that if you charged with your lance and bent a ring. Warhorse fodder is 3 times the price of a plough horse's oats. And if you join the annual tourney circuit, entry fees plus herald painter commissions drain your chest full of coin. You sip tainted mead and pray you don't end up selling your armour to buy your horse's feed. Merchant capital lives in wool sacks bound for Bruges. Freight costs 3 shillings for a sack, tolls at every bridge, and bribe to the pirate insurance courier so bandits skip your wagon. Plus Lombard banking interest that skirts church usury bans, but still takes your breath in annual fees. Double entry ledgers demand parchment, ink, and an educated clerk, each a luxury for the trade savvy, and each a hole punched in your growing profits. If you join the clergy, Tithes in grain convert to cash at fair prices, unless your parish reeves cheat you. Chantry endowments act as medieval annuities. You pay up now, get prayers in perpetuity, and hope the souls above give you a discount. Relic tourism brings in coin at miracle cure pricing tiers. Bless a scarf claimed to have wiped Christ's brow for a halfpenny. Then watch pilgrims chant for more of your brand of divine receipts. Women and wealth navigate by dowry. A peasant goat equals a few bushels of grain, while a merchant townhouse fetches a tidy sum in shiny coins. Widows claim their dower third, a safety net calculated in precise fractions of estates. But don't think the scrivener can't balk at your petition. Convent entry fees promise a lifelong pension plan. But if the abbess is stingy, your spiritual solace comes with no nail file and a vow of poverty that sure gets tested when you spot silk in the bishop's balcony. Upward or downward, mobility tales bounce through taverns. A miller makes a fortune selling flour, buys a coat of arms in a moment of hubris, loses it all gambling at a tourney, and ends in servitude to the very peasants who bought his grain. A knight bankrupts his estate, funding a crusade, sells armor at half value, becomes a mercenary, and dies poor, face eaten by rats in a faraway siege. A serf who saves pennies after the Black Death buys his freedom with a small purse. Long tale short, ambition can be as fatal as the plague. Shift focus to investing in dirt. If you want to buy an acre, in England it might cost 1 to 2 shillings, but in Flanders the same plot runs higher. And over in Song China, rice paddies trade in coins pegged to silver taels. Your entry fine and legal parchment fees tack on half a shilling, plus a church approval stamp that's another farthing if the bishop's secretary needs ale. Your mind reels at crop ROI. A handful of wheat seeds might yield 30-fold in harvest, barley 25-fold, rye a modest 20-fold. 3-field rotation means fallow fields produce nothing but feed your livestock, and you pay neighbours for manure as fertilizer expense, a cost line item disguised as charitable bribes. Before you taste the fruits of your field, the tithes come due. A gross 10% of your produce is siphoned off to the church, and if your rector decides to build a storage barn, you're on the hook for extra fees. Famine. Year exemptions exist, but diplomats say they're rarely granted. Bring your own goats to survive. Labour costs for harvest bite. A reaper day wage paid in a loaf of bread and 2 pints of ale. But if the harvest drags into winter, the shepherd boy's annual hire includes a promise of winter boots if he survives the cold. Incentive ale for harvest crews keeps productivity peaks at 2 pints, but watch the tipsy workers stumble and drop grain. Sometimes the brew costs more than the spilled harvest. Tech upgrades like a heavy plough team shared over 6 neighbours might cost you a boar's head at the feast, or a few days of harvest in service, but the yield doubles when you scrape deep enough for turnips. Watermill franchises cost a fee paid to the Lord, but once you own a share, grinding grain becomes a revenue stream rather than a chore. Risk management exists in primitive forward contracts. You stash grain in abbey granaries at fixed prices, or pay bribes to avoid hoarding penalties that come down like a guillotine. Building a breadbasket buffer for 2 failed harvests means investing in storage, digging cellars that collect moisture and rot half your yield, but failing to prepare equals famine. Comparative manners highlight variance. An English domain net margin might be 30%, while an Andalusian huerta margin reaches 40% due to irrigation. Japanese Shun rice stipend systems trade rice for loyalty, not coin, and climate shock sensitivity. Scores soar when drought hits the Mediterranean. You balance study to know where to buy property next, hoping to patch yield gaps with foreign imports. Long-term ROI. Land accumulating hidden in the floorboard coins might yield slow but steady returns. Post-plague wage spikes reshape rents so that some heirs see 50% jumps in lease payments overnight. Generational wealth locked in entail prevents sale, while partible inheritance splits land into strips so narrow they're worthless. Wisdom says, buy contiguous plots, not flecks scattered like postage stamps. War on credit grinds you. Scutage payments buy you out of personal service. 3 nights at the front, replaced by a penny tribute. But that penny costs you your plough, and conscripting a peasant archer armours him for the levy, while equipping a knight demands a treasure chest. Plague economics hammer you too. Within 3 harvests, wages triple because labourers died and lords scramble for scythe hands. Empty manors auction for ghost estate prices. Bargain or curse, depending on your guts. New taxes pop up to patch royal revenue, and you find yourself paying a levy you never heard named until it's due. Health and medicine drain coffers. Barber surgeon's menu is a butcher's worst dream. Bloodletting for a penny, cupping for a farthing, arrow extraction for 3 pence. Apothecary sells imported spices like pepper at jewellery prices, while local herbs cost half but might taste like goat droppings. Miracle Cure donation boxes for relic vials ring with coin if you believe the relic saved your plague-racked cousin. Justice, travel, and other pitfalls wait. A fine for poaching. The Lord's rabbit might be 2 pennies, but the price of a pilgrimage budget, indulgence fee, hostel bed, Saint Shrine tip jar, burn through gold and leave you begging in foreign tongues. Marine insurance premium for a wool cargo to Genoa costs more than the wool's value if storms strike. Money lending and workarounds lurk. Jewish banker interest ceilings hover at 12%, but Christian lenders cloak usury in fees and bribes. Pawnbroker Lombards give you a cloak for coin at ruinous interest rates, and grain in advance contracts masquerade as disguised loans, leaving you owing more grain than you ever harvested. Superstition expenses boggle. Exorcist appearance fees plus travel costs demand a groat if you suspect a demon in your barn. Astrologer's yearly horoscope retainer eats a penny every month, and protective amulet markup at midsummer fairs costs 3 farthings. But you pay because imagining protection might stave off the Black Death for another week. Pre-chart inflation. Every coin feels lighter when silver pennies are debased and clipped. 14th century price revolution snapshots show bread doubling while wages linger. Bread-to-wage ratios shift from 1 loaf costing a half-day's labour to costing a full day, and serfs scramble to survive. Diversify or die. Side gig barley brewing in the backyard, ale selling on market day, wool merchant investing in ship shares or early joint venture monasteries, funding bridge repairs. Living only off crops is a gamble too big. Investing in a local craft or lending to a mason to buy bricks sometimes pays more than tiling fields. Hidden taxes echo in the present. Bridge penny is medieval highway toll booth. Guild entry is professional licensing fee. Church tithe morphs into income tax withholding for peasants. Echo the past in every fine, fee, and tax, reminding you no century invented the nuisance of coin collection. Emergency funds dawn. Stashing coins in a crock under the hearth is medieval bank account. A risky one if your spouse drinks too much. Community guild relief funds act as proto-insurance if plague or fire strikes. A mutual aid pact you hope never to test. Plague masks cost more than common mercy. but maybe a nose full of vinegar keeps miasma away and your lungs intact. Status signaling spans centuries. Bright madder red dye was medieval designer logos. Feast days to flaunt wealth were the Instagram dinners of the 14th century. Carrying a gilt silver dagger was today's luxury watch. Status meant having the best wool, not flaunting a face full of gold. Legacy and estate planning. Dowry negotiation was medieval prenup. Entail protected land from creditors, and chantry endowments turned into charitable foundations. Families wrote wills on parchment, tucked under the bishop's pillow, hoping children didn't contest them at sword point. Same money anxiety, different century. Fear of famine echoes fear of recession. Hoarding silver turns into hoarding crypto. Tavern braggart morphs into meme stock influencer. The tools change, but the hustle remains. Your day ends as it began. You collapse on your bunkhouse bench, 3 farthings left, a missing tooth, a borrowed cloak smelling of tallow, and a desperate hope tomorrow's dawn brings coin, not curses. As you drift into dreams punctuated by the tavern's last murmur, you remember that medieval finance wasn't just about ledgers. It was survival, drama, and endless improvisation. Your purse emptied as fast as your flask refilled, but the promise of tomorrow, of a shilling saved or a dour third claimed, keeps you alive. So here's to medieval money, messy, maddening, and absolutely fascinating. Keep your wits sharp, your purse tighter, and remember, in a world where a single farthing can be the difference between dinner and desperation, every coin counts more than gold ever could. And that, my friends, is how you survive wallets, markets, and manners before the sun sets on your coin, and before the next plague takes half your neighbors. Hey gang, let's pivot now from that single day's hustle to the bramble of income streams that twist through medieval lives like creeping ivy. Welcome to the world from serf to silk merchant. As a peasant, your day job is kneeling in the field for labor service days, maybe 6 or 7 a week during planting or harvest, and the Lord watches your every plough turn. Cash rent alternatives exist at 3 pennies per acre, but pennies are rarer than hen's teeth, so you stick to hands in soil. Coin scarcity means harvest is payday. You might gather a handful of sheaves for a loaf of bread, but the rest feeds the manor's granary until market day. Seasons dictate that coin flows in September, then trickles out by October, leaving you scrambling to barter poultry or eggs for anything in winter. Hidden in the fine print of your serfdom is the heriot, a death tax on your best ox or mare. If you croak before harvest, the manor seizes the plough animal that feeds your family. You bury your second best goat, pray for health, and consider joining the church just so you don't die debt-ridden. Watch the Lord's ledger with envy. Domain grain queues a monopoly. Every peasant required to grind at his mill, paying a tenth in kind. Potters must pay for bake-oven use, vintners for wine press, and idle gossipers hush, because the steward tallies pence in and pence out, tallying your misery as profit. If you dare dream of upward mobility, you look to guild apprenticeship, a 7-year contract to become a shoemaker. But first, you cough up a buy-in fee that's half a year's earnings. You hand over coin for a toolkit. Deposit you'll likely never see again if you flop, so you practice on old shoes until your knuckles bleed. Guild rules demand you wear livery, but that's code for immediate fines if you slouch into the tavern after sundown. Tardy to fraternal mass or wearing your apron in the alehouse. 3 farthings gone before you find a seat. Eyeing the nightly contingent you see overhead like a horror show. Male hauberks decay under rust. Repair costs eat 3 farthings per blade. Warhorse versus plough horse fodder price gap is such that feeding a destrier bankrupts a commoner's savings. Witnessing the Lord's squire brag about a caftan of fresh velvet while peasants starve is a weekly spectacle. Mind the annual tourney circuit. Entry fees cost more coin than the average peasant sees in a lifetime. Plus, commissioning a herald painter to etch your coat of arms is a luxury few can afford. If you lack coin, you fight under the Lord's banner and share glory. But if you lose face, and maybe your head if you're unlucky. Shift perspective to merchant capital. Wool sacks heading to Bruges rack up freight, tolls, and a pirate insurance surcharge that probably filters to some unscrupulous river bandit who swears he never sank your boat. Lombard banks loan currency at steep interest, circumventing church usury bans, and every coin you borrow is paid back in silver taels, plus 3% extra each year. Double entry ledgers become mandatory if you want to stay solvent. Parchment costs a groat per sheet, ink a halfpenny per drop, and an educated clerk charges a shilling a week to record your every purchase, sale, and bribe. Skip a single day of entries, and tomorrow's profit could vanish into the next margin call. If you heed the church's coffers, tithes in grain often convert to cash at fair prices. But fair is a relative term when the rector decides he's entitled to extra after Reno on the storage barn. Your neighbour's grape harvest pays for that fancy chapel, and you don't get a say. Chantry endowments are medieval annuities. You give a lump sum, win prayers for your soul, and hope you don't enter purgatory broke. Market for relic tourism is golden. Pilgrims pay to glimpse a saint's fingerbone on designated holy days, dropping coins into donation boxes at tiers that would make modern theme parks blush. Women navigate wealth by negotiating dowries, peasant goats for a poor farmer's daughter, merchant townhouse for the bourgeoisie. But if you're a widow, that dour third could keep you fed, unless the scrivener fudges numbers. Convent entry fees promise a lifelong pension in robes, but if the abbess is tight-fisted, your spiritual peace costs more than a case of leprosy. Whisper of upward or downward. Mobility keeps taverns buzzing. The miller who buys a coat of arms with flour profits ends up pouring grain into the Lord's mouth after gambling it away. The knight who funds a crusade offloads his estate for a lance and dies selling his armour for pennies to fund horse feed. The serf who scrimps pennies post-Black Death buys freedom with a small purse shining brighter than the Lord's tarnished crown. Now let's talk land, because dirt was the ultimate investment. Buying an acre in England costs you 1 to 2 shillings, but in Flanders it's 3, and in Song China, rice paddies map to silver taels per hectare. You budget for entry fines, legal parchment, and a church approval stamp that tacks on a few pence if the bishop's busy. Crop ROI is a numbers game. A wheat seed yields 30-fold if the skies don't open in hail. Barley yields 25-fold, rye 20-fold. 3-field rotation means 1 field stays fallow. Fallow doesn't mean free, because your neighbours demand manure as fertiliser, so you trade pigs for muck. Then there's tithes and taxes. A gross 10% in produce vanishes before your family sets teeth to broth. Rector builds a storage barn on your tithe, and famine year exemptions are as rare as an honest tax collector. If the drought hits, the Lord might cut you a deal, but suspicious scribes might claim you underreported yields. Labour costs for harvests swell. A reaper day wage in bread plus 2 pints of ale seems cheap, but by time you pay for lodging and clothe yourself in rags, you're lucky if you net a loaf. Shepherd boys cost a pair of winter boots and a promise not to stab you if you skimp on ale, because incentive ale is the fuel for productivity. even if it means stumbling through the scythe fields by twilight. Tech upgrades. Heavy plough teams amortize over 6 neighbours, but demand boar's head roast at feast time as tribute. Watermill franchise fees keep your mill wheel turning, but the Lord's half of the flour grinds away your profits. Iron horseshoe expense cuts hoof disease, but each iron shoe costs 2 farthings, and you go through horseshoes faster than gossip at a rumour mill. Risk management is ugly. Grain hoarding penalties come with fines or bribes to avoid them. Primitive forward contracts lock you into selling harvest at fixed rates to abbey granaries that might collapse if famine hits. Building a bread basket buffer means sellers that trap moisture, rot half your grain, and leave you bankrupt if the next season's yield halves again. Compare manners. English domain net margins hover at 30%. Andalusian huertas hit 40% thanks to irrigation canals. Japanese Shun rice stipends trade rice for loyalty, not coin. Climate shock sensitivity skyrockets in regions prone to drought, so you hedge by investing in multiple estates. But that's a plan for wealthy merchants, not broke farmers. Long-term ROI swaps dirt for hidden in floorboard coins. Post-plague, wages spike 50%, rents climb. Ambitious families entwine land in entail to protect from creditors, but partible inheritance slices estates into worthless strips. Lesson: buy contiguous plots, not postage stamp remnants, or you become a cautionary tale in a noble's verse. Now you've traversed from flats to farms, from serf to silk merchant, from pence to shillings. Remember that medieval money was chaotic, hilarious, and sometimes lethal. Hold your purse tight, your wits tighter, and don't trust a tax collector with your last groat, because medieval finance never ever took a day off. Imagine waking in a damp, dimly lit hovel just off the market square. The kind of room where you can feel the weight of every coin you don't have. You sit up on your straw mattress, your bones complaining like a broken wagon, and you realize the scuffle has already begun. Bells are tolling from the church tower, summoning every able hand to pay scutage this market day. You stretch out a tired hand and fish 2 pennies from your tattered pouch. 2 pennies. But the levy is a full penny. You must choose. Go to the battlefield in rusty mail that's already tearing flesh, or pay the penny that might cost you the only decent loaf of bread you'll see before nightfall. You swallow hard, clutch your silver penny tighter, and decide to pay so you can keep working the fields. You rise, splintered boots cracking on the cold floor, and trudge through the muddy alleyways toward the town gate. On the way, you pass the scytheman, an old crone with a crutch, haggling over a single penny for her scythe handle that snapped last week. You recall how you loaned her 2 pennies to buy a replacement, and now she sells your handle for 3 farthings. You feel a pang. 3 farthings for that handle, 3 farthings less in your pocket, but you can't do without it. Further down, the weaver huffs at a merchant who has offered 2 pennies for a length of wool cloth long enough to patch your tunic. You wonder how many families go hungry when cloth trades hands for so little. At the tannery, the tanner hocks a pair of boots for 1 penny, the same boots you know glued his daughter's shoes together only last winter. You pity him, but you have your own decimal decisions to make. You scramble dead leaves from your pouch and collect just enough to pay your scutage. And that's when the haggling begins anew. The monk at the gate demands 3 farthings to bless your farthing, insisting it brings divine favour. You scrape together another farthing from the crumbling floorboards of your home, and in the end you hand over a penny and a farthing, more than you hoped. Against the toll booth, the guard pushes a wooden plank under your arm. whistles and says, "First time falling short, eh?" You blink from the sting of his voice, think of your ailing mother waiting for bread, and shuffle on. By mid-morning, you have just enough to buy a rough elm bow and a handful of arrows from a travelling peddler. The peddler is in a hurry. He's heard about a new levy on merchants at the bridge and needs to be gone before dusk. You count 3 pennies for the bow, 2 farthings for each arrow, and a halfpenny for a crude leather bracer. Suddenly, your entire year's nest egg is gone. You wrap the bows and arrows in a rag and tuck them under your cloak. The peddler looks at your face, your cheeks sunken, your beard mangy, and nods once, quietly, as though understanding that this bow is your only hope to keep the creditors at bay. You leave him a blessing and step back out onto the muddy road, wondering how you will reclaim those 3 pennies when you must still buy seed for spring. Meanwhile, across the square, the Lord's squire curses loud enough to be heard above the church bells. The squire's horse bolted from the stable this morning, shattering the bridle and spraying the dirt with splinters of iron. The farrier shook his head at the palace gate and demanded 3 farthings to reforge the bit, plus half a penny for a hoofpick and leather strap. The squire, strapped for coin just like you, scraped together half a penny by pawning his father's signet ring. Now he's forced to walk barefoot back to the manor, his face moon-white with dread. And you, carrying your bow and arrows, catch his eye as he limps past. There is no dignity in poverty, only bargains driven by desperation. As afternoon ripples across the square, a hush falls over the crowd at the sight of the plague cart rolling through town. The clerk at the weighhouse rings a bell 3 times, announcing that labourers, once paid a loaf of bread and 2 pints of ale, the equivalent of 1 penny, now command 2 loaves and 4 pints, 3 pence, just to harvest a day's worth of grain. Fields lie half-harvested because no one will work without those extra pence. The Lord Steward scrabbles to find funds to pay the hands, dipping into the margins he kept for repairs. He emerges from the barn's shadow, his cheeks flushed, and instructs you to find any spare grain to sell to the church at a tithe-break price, 10% above the local market. If you refuse, the rector will levy an additional halfpenny per bushel when he builds a new storage barn, another fine you can ill afford. You glimpse 2 fleeing tenants whose screams echoed down the lane. They collapsed before they reached the fields, victim to dysentery. Word is that the manor will auction their plots as ghost estates for a mere fraction of what they're worth. Land once worth 10 shillings now sells for half. You watch the auctioneer's hand rise, calling earlier bidders at 5, 4, 3 shillings, until a wealthy cloth merchant, eyes gleaming, swallows the deed at 10 shillings. Your heart quickens. If only you had those 10 shillings. But soon the manor's taxes spike again. 1 penny per hide owned. If you own a single ox hide, you pay a penny. The Lord counts his barns and oxen, groans, and then tells you to, "You owe, hantai, hetai." You confess that you have nothing left, and he nods slowly. 1 penny for my palace's stone, he says, inscribing special aid on his tall ledger. You squeeze your chin to keep the tears at bay, hands trembling as you fish another penny from your ragged sock. You hand it over, aware that half of that penny buys the rector another carving for the new barn, while the palace rears its marble towers beyond the hills. You retreat, cloak whipping behind you like a flag of surrender. In the days that follow, other families flee at news of a fresh outbreak beyond the next valley. Some sell meagre estates for pennies, pocketing enough to board a cattle barge to a supposedly safer region. Land speculators, men with coin and cartography, move in like vultures to buy those plots. Rumour spreads of another plague wave, and the sale prices tumble again. Contracts exchange hands on cornerstones. A binding deed costs 2 pennies in scribe fees to transfer, so the speculators owe the town coffers twice per plot. But when the poverty-stricken villagers return to reclaim their fields, plague wishers, as the children jeer, they find the deeds under lock and key, and the speculators posting guards. The bailiff pockets 2 pennies for the chamber's orders, leaving families to beg for mercy at cathedral steps. And then, just when you think the cycle cannot spin further into despair, your own child collapses in your arms. The barber surgeon arrives, his tray rattling with metal cups and saw-toothed forceps. He demands 1 penny to bleed the child, a farthing to cut the chest, 3 pence to remove the arrow lodged deep in the thigh bone. Desperation pins you to the floor as you hand over every copper in your pouch. The surgeon roars a victorious cackle as he packs mud around the wound. You lie awake at dawn, your child still feverish and your purse empty. The barter for another day has cost your hope. You pray through that night for healing that does not come despite bloodshed and bitter cups of holy water. In the quiet hush of sunrise, you skirt the apothecary's window, nose wrinkled at the jars of imported spices. Pepper for a farthing a pinch, cinnamon for 3 farthings a sliver, cloves for 2 farthings each. You know that to soothe a simple cough, you need at least 3 pinches of pepper, 3 farthings gone, and you have precisely 1 farthing left. You turn away from the doorway and wander the market in search of roadside herbs, mugwort, horehound, and a handful of marshmallow root. The vendor spatters the herbs with contempt. "Smells like the bog, that does," he says, charging 2 farthings. You pay, tuck the murky greens into your pocket, and leave with a faint hope that bitter roots can cure more than agony. Days pass, and an ordinary fever becomes a plague risk, and you hear villagers queue to kiss a saint's relic for half a penny. The relic, a saint's finger bone, lies atop a gilded plinth under a canopy of linen. You see them line up, mothers pressing the bone against children's foreheads, traders murmuring prayers for protection, beggars crossing themselves, offering the half-penny they scraped from morning scraps. You join the queue, clenching that final half-penny until the moment your lips brush cold wood. The priest nods once, his eyes distant, and you walk away feeling heavier, as if that small bone carries not blessing, but the sorrow of every penitent who thought this ritual would save them from an unseen horror. They leave empty-handed, unhealed. You leave wondering if faith costs more than coin can buy. Even justice comes at a cost. You recall the day you were caught poaching the Lord's prized rabbit. The huntmaster's hounds caught you climbing the hedge at dusk, and the penalty was 2 pennies or a day in the stocks. 2 pennies? You had none, so you sold your best keg of ale for 3 pennies to satisfy the fine, and you limped off, head bowed. Now you wonder, was freedom worth the price of a barrel of ale? With the barrel gone, you recall how you huddled under the bridge that night, clutching those 3 pennies beneath your cloak. The river's murmur like a lullaby that offered no solace. By dawn, you'd sold 2 pennies worth of stolen firewood just to buy bread, all because you longed for rabbit meat. Every misstep in medieval justice takes you to the brink of hunger. Or maybe you're a pilgrim on the road to Santiago de Compostela, your heart set on absolution. You cross border after mountain pass after river ford, counting each farthing you use for lodgings and meals, hoping that a fresh wound in the road won't cost your only copper. Midway through your journey, your coin pouch is slit by a cut purse at a crowded hostel. You're left with a single farthing and a dwindling faith. The hostel keeper demands 2 pence for lodging next time, so you barter a modest wooden cross relic in lieu of coin. That night, you huddle on a straw pallet, shivering against the damp, and dream of home, of hearth fires and children's laughter. Each memory a candle you can't afford to burn. While pilgrims despair, merchants face their own brand of terror. You could be shipping wool sacks down to Genoa, each sack's freight costing 6 pence, plus a bridge penny at every wooden crossing. Merchant lanes are strewn with toll collectors and weeping peasants. When pirates lurk along the river's curve, the pirate insurance bribe demands half your cargo's value. If you refuse, you risk a nighttime ambush, your wagon tipped into the murky water and your goods stolen. Some merchants pay the bribe without question, others trust steel and faith. You choose bribe, handing over 3 shillings worth, thinking to yourself that if your wool disappears overboard, at least you have your hide and your life. You might be the silk merchant, preparing a caravan eastward towards Samarkand. Lombard bankers offer loans at 3% interest to fund bolts of silk, and you accept, believing the profit margin in the eastern market will cover the risk. 3 months later, your caravan is lost in a desert sandstorm. Camels stagger in confusion, silk rolls tumbling into dunes, and Arab bandits strip your saddlebags. When you return to the Lombards, humiliated, they seize your wool holdings. You depart penniless, a tattered traveller seeking work in every city, begging with nothing but a cursed memory of lost bolts. Perhaps you are the lord of a modest manor, once content with grain yields and serf labour. Famine's whisper grows into a roar this season, the fields flooded by unexpected spring rains. You borrowed coin to plant extra barley last fall, believing the gamble worth it. Now, the young shoots rot in waterlogged furrows. Half a dozen lenders loom at your door, each demanding 1 penny of repayment for every 20 head of stock you hold. Desperate, you pawn the family's silver candlesticks to the church for a loan of 5 shillings at steep interest. You lose prestige among your peers. Once a respected steward, you now join the ranks of indebted minor lords. Rumours swirl of your impending excommunication if you default again. Health crises compound your woes. The barber surgeon's fees alone threaten your manor's coffers. An arrow lodged in a soldier's thigh costs 3 pence, and a bandage of linen strips costs another penny. The apothecary's unguent, 10 drops of ground saffron mixed with vinegar, costs 2 farthings per drop, and those saffron threads come from the farthest reaches of Arabia. You try a miracle cure, paying 3 farthings to an exorcist called out from the next county to scare away demons thought to cause sickness. He chants in an unfamiliar tongue, and all you hear are echoes of your coin vanishing into the night. Justice and travel entangle further. When your younger daughter is accused of slander, calling a neighbour's wife a witch, you must journey to the Shire Court to defend her. You hire a coachman for 2 pence a night, pay for bread at a farthing a loaf, and bribe the chancery clerk a penny to ensure your petition is recorded correctly. You arrive battered and weary, only to lose the case. The fine is 4 pence, plus a groat to the clerk to reprint the verdict. You exit the court doors with perhaps 1 penny left, a daughter traumatized, and a family unraveling. Even maritime enterprises fail you. You load wool on a tract boat for sale in Genoa, confident you've purchased a marine insurance policy at a penny. Storms drive your vessel onto submerged rocks. Your wool drifts away on slick currents. The insurers pay you only half the estimated value, citing a clause that acts of God override full coverage. You're left owing the boat's crew a penny for partial salvage. You disembark, soaked, tired, and penniless. Lending circles means solidarity until you can't repay. Jewish bankers, protected by royal decree, charge 12% interest, just under the church's 10% cap. If you're Christian, you risk excommunication for dealing with them. Christian lenders hide fees in handling charges and ledger maintenance, so a loan of 3 pence repaid as 4 pence a month later seems small until the interest compounds. Before you know it, you owe 40 pence on what you borrowed 10 pence for, and you can't see a path out of the hole. If you default on a loan, the Lombard pawnbroker welcomes your cloak in exchange for 3 pence. To redeem it in 6 months, you pay 4 pence. If you fail, the cloak is sold, and you lose both the cloth and the coin you thought to save. Clad now in threadbare rags, you wander outside the gates, the town guard eyeing you with suspicion. One slip of your unshod foot on a muddy patch, and he drags you to the stocks for vagrancy, charging you another farthing for the privilege. This cycle of pawning and default is an endless loop. 1 farthing at a time, loom by loom, it unravels your life. Superstition cloaks every nook with commerce. In a single evening, you might pay a groat plus travel fees to an exorcist to root out curses in your barn. It's rats, not devils. Neighbors sniff when they see him chanting and waving his hands. Once he departs, you find a protective amulet in your pocket, a small bone carved with a saint's face. You paid 3 farthings for it at the midsummer fair. Knights find you pressing the amulet to your chest as you snore under a damp blanket, praying it holds any promise of safety. Come dawn, you cough and spit blood, but the amulet lies still in your fist, a piece of debt you cannot settle. Unexpected finds emerge when least expected. You fish in the river at dawn, trying to catch dinner. Mid-cast, the bailiff's men surround you. Fishing without a license carries a 2 pence fine. You haven't the coin. You toss the fish back, but they seize your net and charge you 3 pence for timber you cut to heat your cottage. One ill-timed hearth fire lights a spark in the dry wood rafters. You pay a halfpenny fine for improper hearth construction, and the local judge adds a half farthing if you can't show a permit. By dusk, your purse is empty, and you beg tokens at the cathedral steps, offering goat's milk in lieu of coin. Meanwhile, pre-chart inflation gnaws at your sanity. Silver pennies once gleamed in your hand. Now, kings frequently melt them down, mixing copper to mint enough coin for war. A loaf that cost a halfpenny in your youth costs a full penny. A bushel of barley that cost 2 pence now demands 6. Your wages, however, stubbornly cling to 1 penny per day for labour, forcing you to till the fields until your back breaks. You watch money changers trading clipped coins for a fee, verifying each coin's weight with tongs and scales, charging a farthing per transaction. Ancient heads in your village claim clipped coins are akin to inflation. Fewer silver grains mean less value. They would marvel at today's central banks and digital currencies, but the principle remains. Governments will always manipulate coin to fund their endeavours, leaving you scrambling for a measure of worth that never stays still. You try hedging your risks. Perhaps you brew ale as a side gig, barrel after barrel of cloudy, home-brewed barley, hoping to sell jugs for 2 farthings a mug. Yet suddenly, the local barley price spikes. Your ale, once a pittance to produce, now costs you 3 pence per barrel of grain. Without barley, you can't brew, so your ale sits unsold, rot seeping into the wooden casks. Meanwhile, a wool merchant friend invests in ship shares. 10 shillings to buy 1 share in a cargo bound for Flanders. You recall the last storm that sank a similar fleet, yet he invests anyway. 6 months later, a hurricane splits the hulls of every ship in the fleet. His 10 shillings vanish. You recognize the lesson. Invest too widely, and nature or fate can wipe the board clean. Hidden taxes echo like ghosts in every corner of life. That bridge penny you paid on your way to town is bunked up by the bridge's weary caretakers as a maintenance fee, but you suspect half ends in councilmen's pockets. The guild entry fee for a journeyman's rights to sell in the town costs 2 shillings. 2 shillings you could have spent feeding your children for half a season. The church's tithe, 10% of your produce paid in grain or coin, strikes at your dignity each harvest. You pay it without question until you learn of hidden surcharges. A half-farthing levy to fund a choir's robes, a farthing to repaint the priest's stall. Breeze through your pockets and there's nothing but dust. In desperation, you stash emergency funds in a crock under your hearth floorboards, nesting half pennies beneath straw. Your spouse, superstitious and fearful of bad omens, bursts the crock one night to buy ale, saying it's better to drown sorrow in drink than cling to cold metal. You wake to an empty hearth and curses on your tongue. The same night, a traveller stays under your eaves, an itinerant, free of coin but heavy with gossip. He claims that the local printers will soon offer guild cover for tradesmen, a sort of primitive insurance. Pay a monthly due of 3 farthings, and if you fall ill or your tools break, you receive a loaf and a bowl of pottage for a month. You try to join, but your grocer friend warns that the guild's coffers are empty. They'll deny your claim when your arm shudders with fever. You weigh the risk, pay 3 farthings monthly, or sleep in empty barns until the fever breaks. You choose to pay, and they feed you once, just enough to remind you of what you lack. In the worst winters, plague masks sweep through the streets, vinegar-soaked rags sold for a penny each. A clerk hawks them in front of the church, claiming they ward off miasma. Women line up, big cloth bundles draped over their shoulders. Men cough into their sleeves, eyeing the masks as though they hold life in their folds. You buy one with a trembling hand, 1 penny gone, but the mask clings to your face like a funeral shroud. Next morning you cough freely and watch the cloth slip from your neck as though it never existed. Status signaling costs more than pride. Once, you splurged on a length of madder red dye, 2 pennies for enough cloth to colour your tunic a blazing crimson. You thought to enter the feasts as a man of means, but mud and rain turned that crimson into a muddied brown, drawing cruel laughter from nobles who prefer you in grey. They call you Blood Trickler, a name that sticks more fiercely than any dye. Another time, you bought a gilt silver dagger, a luxury item at 3 shillings, only to lose it in a bar brawl. The smith demands 2 pence to replace it, and your status plummets faster than a drunk thrown out of a window. Planning your legacy seems an impossible task. Your family invests in entail, hoping to keep the land from creditors. You blaze your name on a parchment. To sons, Hugh and Robert, estates to be split equally. But partible inheritance means the land will divide into thin strips, fields so narrow a cow cannot graze. Your younger son curses the entail, arguing that creditors can starve you out if you can't pay debts. 2 pence later, you argue again, hiring a scrivener to rewrite the will. Scrivener's fees cost 2 days' wages, and a bribe to the bailiff of 4 farthings to ignore the missing seal. And still, the ink smudges in your trembling hand. As autumn creeps in, pre-chart inflation gnaws deeper. Clipped coins, edges shaved to harvest silver, abound. Each clipped penny might be worth only 3 farthings. You find that a quarter of your coins are clipped. Your grandmother's dowry, once 30 shillings, now barely buys a bushel of barley. She kneels before the hearth, tears in her eyes, recounting how her thala once bought a cow and now barely buys 2 loaves of bread. You watch her kneel, knowing that roosters sell for 5 pence and her prized fowl is now worth half that. You sense the same money anxiety echoing across centuries. Medieval peasants feared famine, serfs dreaded plague, merchants feared pirates, knights dreaded scutage. Today, fears shift to recession, market crashes, identity theft, crushing debt. The tools change, barns become banks, barns' stone cornices become vaults, but the impulse to hoard, to hedge, to trust in spite of risk, all remains. We hoard silver now in digital wallets. Hoist volatile cryptos, every bit as uncertain as clipped pennies under a king's decree. Tavern braggarts, who once bellowed their deals and wagers over tankards, now morph into social media influencers. Their voices broadcast across screens, each tweet or post a modern-day shout in a smoky room. Chants swapping farthings for futures now echo in comments threads. Buy low, sell high, rather than roll dice, claim goat. And just like the brawls that erupted over cheating dice, today's digital brawls explode over insider tips and memes that vanish with a market dive. Your purse lies empty, your neighbor's purse empty, and you realize that surprise expenses gulp coin like rats devouring grain. In this economy, the only sure investment is to scrimp and save, to brace for the next levy, the next plague wave, the next crop failure. Yet beyond the shock of surprise expenses, there is a broader truth. History rhymes, the past echoes in the present, and our modern struggles are but faint refrains of those older tunes. Consider pre-chart inflation. Centuries before economists plotted price indices on parchment, medieval folk watched silver pennies debased by kings who melted them to fund wars. Clipped coins circulated like modern counterfeit bills. Merchants measured weight with tongs, charging a fee per coin. In the 14th century, the price revolution took root. Bread prices doubled, barley tripled, and wages stubbornly remained the same. A loaf that cost a half day's labour became a full day's labour, leaving families marooned in misery. Bread-to-wage ratios defined survival. When a loaf cost an hour's work, families survived. When it cost a day's work, hunger stalked every child. Today, when groceries outpace paychecks, young families feel that same squeeze. Inflation is ancient, a silent thief with no allegiances. Diversify or die was medieval advice born of necessity. Peasants brewed backyard ale, selling jugs at 2 farthings. They spun wool into cloth, traded for spices, and lent sheep to neighbours for a share of lambs. Merchants invested in shared ship voyages, each voyage a gamble against storms and bandits. Monks, with scriptorium ledgers, financed bridge repairs through profit sharing. Every 5 pence invested returned 3 pence at harvest if the river did not flood. Craftsmen diversified too. Shoemakers sold leather scraps to glue makers. Weavers bartered cloth for local salt, and coopers made barrels for rising demand in wine. Their survival hinged on spread risks. If grain failed, they had wool. If wool markets crashed, their coopering skills sustained them. Modern investors juggle stocks, bonds, real estate, yet the principle remains. Spreading risk ensures you weather storms that sink single-crop farmers. Hidden taxes are as old as roads. The medieval bridge penny parallels today's highway toll booth, siphoning coin for roadway upkeep. Guild entry fees mirror modern professional licensing. Pay 2 shillings for the right to sell wares in town, much as lawyers pay bar fees now. Church tithes, 10% of your harvest, functioned like income tax withholding. Whether paid in grain or coin, the weight on your chest felt the same. Bypass a toll, face fine, ignore licensing, face suspension. Fees gatekeep access, whether to a market stall or digital platform. Regulatory charges keep kingdoms and corporations flush, generations apart, but motives unchanged. Emergency funds saved medieval lives. People stashed coins under hearthcrocks or paid tiny guild dues for occasional relief. Skip 3 farthings a month, lose the right to bread when plague struck. Today, we stash savings in bank accounts, buy health insurance, and claim unemployment benefits if we lose jobs. Medieval insurers were informal compacts among neighbours, an oath of mutual aid. Today's policies are printed in fine type. Both promise relief in crisis, but fall short when demand spikes. When fire or plague hits, those with reserves sleep more soundly. Those without stare hungrily at the same hearth they once hid coins beneath. Status signalling bridges centuries. Madder red tunics were medieval designer logos. Only the wealthy flaunted bright colours. Red marked you as someone who paid 2 pennies per yard for imported dye. Now, designer labels cost hundreds of dollars apiece. Feast days showcased status like modern social media feeds. Nobles invited scribes to record menu and guest lists, akin to smartphones capturing events for an online audience. A single dish, sturgeon for 3 pence, saffron pudding for a penny, was medieval Michelin star dining. Today's influencers post lavish dinners on Instagram, chasing likes and sponsorships. Gilt silver daggers, 3 shillings, were medieval luxury watches, signalling wealth while risking theft or envy. The urge to display remains, though the medium evolves. Legacy and estate planning have always mattered. Medieval families wrote wills on parchment, invoking entail to protect land from creditors. Land passed to eldest sons, leaving younger siblings to scrap for meagre plots. Disputes over dowries, 1 goat versus a townhouse, mirrored modern prenups. Clerks charged fees for writing contracts. A will cost 2 pence, plus a bribe of 4 farthings to the bailiff. Missed a letter or lose a seal, and contested claims swallowed dowries like drought devours crops. Today, trusts and prenuptial agreements protect assets, but attorneys charge hundreds of dollars for paperwork. Medieval chantry endowments, 10 shillings for perpetual masses, morphed into charitable foundations. Today's donors fund scholarships and research, leaving names inscribed on halls. The impulse to outlive one's mortal coil through giving transcends time. Ultimately, medieval money anxiety echoes our own. Medieval peasants feared famine. Today, we fear recession. Serfs feared plague. We fear pandemics. Merchants feared pirates. We worry about cyber attacks. Knights feared scutage. We dread taxes. Tools have changed. A barn's hidden granary is now a bank vault. A barn's iron lock is now encryption. But the psychology of scarcity, hope, and fear stays constant. We hoard silver, now in digital wallets. They hoarded grain to stave hunger. We chase volatile crypto. They gambled on ship shares. Their tavern braggarts bellowed over dice. Today's influencers post memes and ask for clicks. In both eras, reputation equates to coin. Whispers carry weight. Gossip sells cartridges, and each claim of fortune demands skepticism. As the sun sets on our narrative, picture yourself collapsing on a wooden bench in the tavern, the air heavy with smoke and spilled ale. You count the coins in your pouch, nothing but dust. You recall each levy, each plague mask, each clipped coin and padlocked chest. Yet in that ragged moment, you feel the pulse of community, the laughter at a dice game, the scold's shrill reprimand, the barkeep's sly wink when you flip him a farthing to stir his brew. Medieval finance was survival first, drama second, and improvisation a constant companion. Your purse empties as your flask refills. Tomorrow, you will trudge these same lanes, chase those same farthings, and face new surprises beyond your trembling grip. So here's to medieval money, messy, maddening, absolutely fascinating, and not so different from our own. Keep your wits sharp, your purse tightly laced, and remember, in a world where a single farthing can be the difference between dinner and desperation, every coin counts more than gold ever could. And as you swipe your credit card or check your online portfolio, whisper a silent nod to those serfs who once scratched half pennies in the mud, clawing through surprise expenses beneath the same moonlight that guides you now. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it rhymes in coins and curses, in loans and legacies, in famine and finance. You're not just defending against surprise expenses, you're part of a lineage that knows the sting of a leap in tax, the ache of a lost tool, and the searing truth that sometimes, just sometimes, that next pence can save or shatter your life. Thanks for exploring medieval shocks and modern echoes with me tonight. If you found value, share, subscribe, and ring the bell, because understanding our past can save us from repeating it, one farthing at a time.